Accessible Arts acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders, past and present, and recognise their enduring connection to this land, its culture, and its communities. We honour the long history of storytelling, cultural exchange, and artistic expression that has flourished here for thousands of years. Personally, I would like to acknowledge disabled and deaf First Nations people. Always was, always will be. Hello and welcome to Access Ideas and Insights podcast, brought to you by Accessible Arts. I'm Vidili Larenchev and I'll be your host for the next 6 episodes. For any Accessible Arts fans out there, you might have guessed that this podcast was developed as an extension of our Access Ideas and Insights hybrid series. That means we're keeping the bold conversations going, diving into fresh ideas and tackling the big questions around access and inclusion across the arts sector. Each episode, I'll be joined by leading experts, including artists with disability to cultural sector influencers. This podcast is a new initiative for Accessible Arts, and from the start, access has been at the core of its creation. As part of this development, we've worked closely with the Deaf Advisory Group to ensure this series is reaching our audiences. Each episode will be released with a transcript, Auslan video, and captions. Accessible Arts acknowledges access is a place of learning. So, throughout this series, we'll continue to develop the access for the podcast so that we can be a catalyst for change within the arts and cultural sector. This episode contains themes of ableism, medical trauma, marginalisation, isolation, mental health. This episode dives into an exciting theme, the future of disability storytelling. We're joined by 2 fantastic guests, each bringing a unique perspective to this conversation. First up, we have Christopher Bryant, an award-winning playwright, performer, and educator here to share his insights from a creative and artistic lens. Then we'll hear from Bria McCarthy, Wiradjuri writer and director for theatre, literature, film and education with a specialty in experimental shadow puppetry. Let's start the conversation off with Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Chris, you have quite an extensive experience in theatre making, in performance art, in space making, I would also chuck in there. You also have a fancy PhD chucked in there too. As a storyteller, how do you see perspective and agency in storytelling? And ultimately, the greater question of who tells the story and how it's told?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, I think, around sort of representation and like, as you said, like the honesty of who's telling whose story. I don't know that it'll ever actually be like, okay, we're all agreed. It's all okay. Everyone can say this story or they can't, or, I think my opinion of that question, or my answer to that question rather, has changed as my career has gone on. And, I'm a queer person, I have acquired disability, and that really shifted the perspective of a lot of things for me. I think towards the start of my career, it was very much of anyone can tell anyone's story, you just got to do it right, you got to do research and stuff. And I think that tracks true to an extent, but I think there is that wider sort of question that is almost becoming a reckoning, I think, of people, as you said, who gets to tell whose story. I think that having own voices stories, honestly, to me, I find them almost always better because they're more authentic. They have that honesty and that truth of that person. And I mean, I'm coming at it from a queer person with a disability, but not just for queerness or for disability. I think for any sort of specific community that one is a part of, there is so much more honesty and truth and detail and interest in the stories that people tell of their community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It makes me consider, though, when it comes to, those specific communities telling their story, Like, what is the urgency in telling our stories? Like, why should we be telling our stories now? Why should we be telling them to people outside our communities? I'm just curious because I think around the future of disability storytelling, I feel like there's an ongoing discussion about who the story is for and why do we so urgently need to be telling disabled specific, or I guess in your specific case of the intersecting between queer disabled, why is there an urgency and why should we be telling stories to people not within our community?
It reminds me a bit, actually, of these discussions that happened quite a few years ago. I think they still happen, but just not as much, around queerness and trans representation in film and straight actors taking away roles from gay people. So obviously that's a specific thing that is not maybe 100% relevant to what we're talking about, but there was a thing of, anyone should be able to play anyone, or anyone should be able to tell anyone's story, and this kind of thing of, everything is fair game. And it's sort of like, okay, I think that is a legitimate answer if we had had the same experiences and we'd had the same opportunities and we'd been considered, but we hadn't and we haven't. So I think the question almost is like, why does a non-disabled playwright need to write a disabled story? If it's because they are deeply embedded in that world and they are, maybe writing it with a disabled playwright, or they are, using a community arts cultural development framework to allow those stories come to life, great. But if it's because you want to do the next curious incident of the dog in the nighttime and you don't even comprehend why that isn't like offensive narrative that's been written by, a playwright who very publicly was like, oh, I didn't do any research, I don't care. That's a sort of another thing. So I guess for me, the importance of us telling our own stories, it's because they're going to be more realistic representations. And so therefore the play and the narrative itself will ring truer. But I think also it's, it fights against this idea that I wish that I could remember the percentage, but I don't. But, disabled people, we're everywhere. We exist, or trans people exist, or queer people exist, or, whatever, marginalization you want to say, we all exist and we are here. And to just say, well, no, why do we need to hear your stories? That's stupid. It's you can't be what you can't see. So it's really great to be able to see other stories there because people get inspired by that. They think maybe I could write a play, or maybe I could make a film, or do any of these things, which everyone should be able to if they want to.
Totally. I get what you mean, how the importance for continuing to push our presence within the arts is because of exactly, it has real world consequences. It does inform policy, it informs just our livelihoods, not just our artistic pursuits. I'm very curious, especially someone that embodies the intersection of queerness and disability. What are the sort of like tensions, expectations, and self-perception you explore? And maybe an example of a work that you've explored that in?
Yeah, of course. So one that I think is particularly present in my mind, maybe because I've just started rehearsing it actually, is the show that I made with my collaborator, Emma Palachkic. It's called New Balance. And so it kind of is directly about the queer disabled experience. So this performance kind of work. So it's not really, it's not like a narrative. It's a whole bunch of scenes, some of them that are from my life, some of them that are from Emma's life. And then we had a whole bunch of audio recorded interludes from other people who sit at that intersection of queerness and disability, to just try and give a map of like, what it is like. Yeah, so I think with New Balance in particular, it really embraced sort of the sort of 90s, 80s, like queer club culture kind of thing. And, big like Keith Haring, who also, as someone with HIV AIDS, could be conceivably sit at that intersection of queerness and disability if he had wanted to. I don't know, I can't speak, he's sadly not with us. But sort of, big sort of brash kind of things, kind of projections and designs and this kind of thing. But it was sort of was taking this queer aesthetic and then trying to to add disability, like in the design for a way. So we made sure that basically every show was a relaxed performance, so that there wasn't a relaxed performance. That just was how it was if you were coming into this space.
I feel like something that's continuing to pop up with your work is this ability to be kind of challenging and flipping on its head perceptions of things. I think definitely, there's a sort of evidence of this very intentional play with perspective. And I'm very curious, why is this practice important to you in disability storytelling?
It's really interesting because I sort of have these two practices that kind of go parallel to each other. One that is a more traditional playwriting practice, where I sort of engage with disability a bit, but the more it's just, theatre. And then this sort of other practice, a side practice, or what started as a side practice and then has now sort of continued to have legs, which is great, of these kind of contemporary performance pieces, which was New Balance, which was this other show that I had this year with Brandex, State of Play, and that I sort of make with Emma Palachkic, who is also queer and disabled. So we think really similarly about a lot of things. We have kind of an interest in self-reflection. I don't know that it was ever super conscious. I'm not trained as a performer, or as a, that's not really been I would do it sometimes, like kind of fun, but, not, NADA trained or VCA trained or anything like that. But so I have an acquired brain injury. I was hit by a car in 2014. And out of that, when I was in hospital, the doctor was like, oh, by the way, you probably just never ride again. I was there being like, what do you mean? And I was like, no, absolutely not. I'll show you. And so I wrote all of this, hand wrote all of this stuff while in hospital. There was, looking back, a bit nonsensical, quite the rantings of someone who is brain injured, doesn't really know what's going on. But I ended up sort of developing those writings into this sort of post-dramatic play that I was also in. And that went really well. In fact, it went so well that it was in the Midsummer Festival 2016. Sold really, really well. Actually quite proud of some of the writing that I did. So from that, Emma and I carved out this sort of shorter show. The play version was 90 minutes. The shorter show was 45, 50. And sort of what we worked out was the through line of it was my experience of hospital and of coming to terms with disability, and it sort of naturally formed as we pieced it all together. And then I guess from that, it wasn't maybe a conscious decision of we're going to make the show about my time in hospital and disability, but it just sort of evolved out of that way. And because of what it was, this kind of contemporary performance thing, it allowed me to be much more honest and upfront. In this kind of performance lecture kind of space, I was able to be like, hi, let's talk about trauma. I drank to alcoholic levels for several years and then I got hit by a car and now I'm this, So in a way, because it was so, the nature and the form of it allowed me to be quite upfront.
Yeah, I feel like it's refreshing to hear you talking about how, there isn't this intention to flip, the perspective. You're just sharing the raw experience, and inherently that is going to be a new perspective. I'm curious, because you talk about trauma. I feel like you explore kind of those bit crunchy areas of taboo and making your audiences a bit uncomfortable. And I'm curious about how do we push taboo without sensationalizing it? Who are these taboos for? And ultimately, are we sharing it for community to feel seen, or are we sharing it for non-disabled audiences as an education point?
Very loud question. Very good. Yes. Well, it's interesting because the first show that Emma and I made, the one that I just talked about, I should have named it. That was called Intoxication. So with Intoxication, that ran from about 2015 to 2019, mid-2019. And in my mind, the only successful, I won't say good, but the only truly successful version of that show was the one that we did in 2019. And that was because there's a difference between a therapy session and a piece of performance. And it wasn't until I did this mentorship with Nicola Gunn, and at the sort of coming towards the end of the mentorship, she was like, is there anything else you want me to look at? And then we're like, oh, like, this got a season coming up, just do a run of the show. And she was like, great, sweet. So we did it. And she just gave this feedback, which was like actually really great, where it was just like, look, yes, this is really great, but I also feel like you're kind of yelling at me, and I feel like you haven't established a framework for an audience to feel safe. And I was like, oh shit, no, I haven't. And like, you know, a half an hour feedback session, like changed the show completely in terms of like, just you know, putting things in place to be like, cool, what I'm talking about is the thing, and there was violence and a lot of internalized ableism. I'm fine now. But we're going to go to some places that are a bit traumatic. Even we're thinking about New Balance, and then this other show that we did with Brand X, State of Play. Both of those were really good, and there was much more of a sort of framework. But even still, people would be like, oh, thank you so much for telling me about it. I didn't know anything about that. But that's a much better, you know, that's more of a, oh, thank you. You've raised some things and I can engage with them, and you've given me the space. Because also I think part of what we were conscious of in making both of those two shows was that it was an exploration, but it wasn't yelling. It wasn't being like, the way that you have like ableist tendencies because you've absorbed all these ableist messages from an ableist society, and blah, blah, blah. It was a, you know, self-reflection and a bit of like, oh, you know, hey, things aren't always great. Hey, all of these things are problems. But it was more of an invitation to engage.
I think it's really nice to hear you talking about, I guess, the concept of risk. And I think as well, it's quite useful to understand that it's a process, especially, you know, when you're wanting to talk about your marginalization, especially, you know, in this case, disability. How do we exactly not relive trauma? How do we educate and share, but do it in a way that's inherently crip in culture? You know, not so much the medicalized framework of what disability is and the narrative there. I think it's really cool to hear how you've kind of navigated going from almost, setting up what society expects us and how they expect us to tell our story. And you're learning that actually cripness is understanding that it's an invitation for others to come into the space and learn and feel cared for, but also, you know, somewhat challenged. And equally as well, you as a performer and sharing your story, the risk you offer and navigate by sharing your story. I think that's really beautiful to hear, because I feel like sometimes emerging artists, we're not, you know, they're not sure how to navigate that, because exactly they don't see their, for lack of a word, predecessors who are, challenging and experimenting and realizing that, there's a nuance between, you know, sharing our stories and not reliving them in a way that harms us or harms our audiences. Chris, with all your experience in storytelling, and especially a variety of forms of storytelling, I'm curious at your advice that you would give for artists that are the future of disability storytelling.
Yeah, I think that we're actually at an exciting time in terms of disability storytelling. I think it's starting to be much more prescient in the spotlight, whatever we want to say, than it was even in 2014, 2015 when I acquired my own disability. But I think that hopefully this change continues to grow and to change things and change people's perspectives. And out of that it engenders young artists to engage with their own stories more and to be like, there is space for me, there is time for me, there is, you know, this is something that if I want to do it, yeah, absolutely. If you want to go perform your show. Like, there's no reason why you shouldn't. Yeah, I think that, you know, it sort of multiplies like the Gremlins or something like that. You know, I like that, you know, not just me, that like there are so many other disabled makers who across art forms who do amazing work. And I just want to see more disabled work. I hope that this continues to grow. I hope that this inspires more people to engage with their own, you know, experience, whatever that experience may be, and that they feel that like empowered, that they can actually engage with their own story. I hope that as a result of there being more shows, that more theatres, more producing companies, more XYZ, whatever you want to say, that everyone steps up to the plate more. Because we do need more access. We do need more, there was... I always think of the first version of New Balance that we performed where we had closed captioning the whole time, along with the projections and everything. And that was like, it feels, we just want to make this as accessible as possible. It was just me putting some stuff into PowerPoint. We did it. And one of the first review that we got was like, I don't understand why there was captioning. And it was sort of like, baby, you don't understand why there was captioning for the show that was like quite directly about disability. Why? Okay. So I guess I hope that, you know, more people do understand why there's captioning, or Auslan, or relaxed performances, or tactile, you know, tours, or all of these things. I hope that they continue to get absorbed into the mainstream, and that's in a positive way, in a way where, you know, it's the whole thing of like universal access. It's actually for everyone. It's not just for us. I think for artists as well, the most important thing is when you're engaging with your own story to find members of your community to tell it with. I've learned so much about myself and my disability through these shows, through Intoxication, New Balance, and State of Play. But I was able to do that and to engage with that really because of my collaborator, Emma, because I was like, I have this amazing person who I really respect as an artist, who is one of my best friends, who is also queer, is also disabled, and we just get it. And, you know, we understand, oh, cool, maybe it's bad, maybe, you know, maybe we're tired today, maybe this, maybe that. So I think there is, you know, that can't also be understated, is finding people, whatever that looks like for you, finding people who will support you in telling your own story and creating a space where it can go be performed, ideally.
Yeah, I relate so much that I think... it's such a good reminder that, no one's going to get you like community. Storytelling. And I guess also, I think as well, like further releasing society from a set narrative of what disability is will come through those sort of collaborations. Chris, our time's up. It's been a hoot though talking to you. Can I just quickly, I think I just want a quick plug of like, what's the next thing coming up for you that we can see or listen to? What can we engage with? What's coming up on your plate?
Well, if you're in Lake Macquarie in September, I think, New Balance is going to be performed there. So that'll be a fun time. And then this other show, State of Play, I mean, it's the thing if we want it to happen. And I think it will happen. We're just not really sure when, where, or how yet.
Thank you, Chris. It's been so nice to chat with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now let's move on to chatting with Bria McCarthy, writer and director for theatre, literature, film and education with a specialty in experimental shadow puppetry. Bria is also a proud Wiradjuri woman. Bria, thank you so much for coming in today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I guess I'm a big fan of yours, and I think the rest of the world needs to know how fabulous you are. You work in so many different forms, and I feel like so much of that is an experimentation, is like relatively like risk-taking. And I'm curious about how these sort of new forms like puppetry expand the possibilities for disabled narratives.
Yeah, well, I guess you're right. The first part of it is that my practice is so jack of all trades at the moment, and it kind of crosses over so many different art forms. And I think that in itself is kind of a testament to the ADHD experience. I'm very deeply obsessed, but in many different ways. And yeah, I've been exploring puppetry for about 5 years now. It started during the pandemic when we were all locked inside and I started playing with bits of cardboard. And from there, yeah, I've really found a wonderful way to connect not only with disabled experiences, but also with non-human experiences. And I'm really trying to build like a hyper empathetic, hyper imaginative practice through that. So the possibilities are endless.
I love that. I think what's beautiful about it, I think, that jack of all trades, like your own multidisciplinary practice, and as well exactly that approach of being very like uninhibited with what you're exploring and why you're exploring, I feel like is a great attitude towards disability. I feel like it flows into that culture so beautifully. I was very curious though, with the role of non-human representation, how does like puppetry and abstraction, how can that explore disability beyond realism?
Yes, this is my favorite. Anything beyond realism. I think realism is so suburban and containing. It really presents such a narrow, limited view of what reality can be, and it also erases so much of the mystery or the magic of what we're kind of living around all the time. And so my practice is very much centered around principles that I have about creating like a more than human artistic experience, a more than human theatre convention, meaning that it extends into the lives of non-humans, animals. And I guess there is a lot of crossover between that empathy and the empathy we can show in disability arts. And yeah, I mean, I use shadow puppetry a lot. And so that means it can be very shapeshifty, very dreamy, very anything is possible. And so I've kind of worked with lately images of like dogs and cats flying in the sky on balloons and stuff like that. So it's a great place, like, I think, to explore possibilities of life beyond the kind of cardboard cutout of realism. I guess also it's, in a way, been accessible. When I was training in 2019, I was kind of coming up against this urge to make really absurd and experimental work. And I thought I was being Brechtian. I realize now I was just being really autistic. I just wanted to present humans in the way that I was kind of seeing them, or that I was kind of wishing to see them on stage. And I was directing actors in a kind of animatronic way, to be honest. I'd be like, stop being so like a person about it, just be more one-dimensional, something easy for me to look at and process. And when I found puppets, I kind of realized this is the language that I've been trying to speak through my whole practice. So puppets like can be so much in that way because they're actors we don't have to make eye contact with, and they can express so much more than realism.
Yeah. I think it's really great how you talk about how, finding your form is so important for not just self-expression, but as well like your access needs. And I think as well it's beautiful to hear how access needs actually feed innovation in the arts. I was very curious because you kind of talked about like this paradigm you created for yourself, that philosophy of, non-human experience and something beyond human. And I was thinking about how do you navigate, I guess, when you get curated for maybe a disabled specific project, how do you navigate your paradigm with like the disability paradigm, or like maybe not so much a CRIP-led paradigm, but potentially like perceived idea of what disability is? Like how do you reach between the middle?
I'm still grappling with this. It's very much going to be a long journey for me to work out really what it means to be an artist. You have to represent everything that you are when you're an artist. You have to kind of learn how to speak up about it. And so I haven't found a lot of harsh criticism about it, but it definitely does look different when I'm in a space with other if I'm in like a festival or anything. Like my work will stand out as its own thing. I think more than anything, I've just found it really connects with neurodivergent kids, and it's really, really special. I have done a couple of festival experiences, and I've created like really calm, serene shadow puppet environments. And just the way that I've been able to connect with neurodivergent kids and see them have that same effect. Like this is this kind of storytelling that kind of creates a sense of flow for them, the same as it does in me. So yeah, I guess we're all doing it in our own way, but like I just keep having to remind myself the only way I can truly do anything at all that's autistic is by being really authentic and not trying to fit any kind of cookie cutter. It speaks very much the same to my experience as an Aboriginal artist. I'm still working out how to communicate with people who maybe aren't mob themselves, that my art is Aboriginal, but it's not going to look like the fridge magnet or like the things you buy in the gift shop. And I've had people tell me my work isn't Aboriginal because it has like wizards or any kind of fantasy iconography or anything that's different. I'm still trying to find a way to communicate that. But baseline is you've got to be authentic because you've got to believe there are other people who want to see that, who relate to that. And so when I'm out in like events doing this work, it just really is very rewarding in that way so far.
Yeah, totally. I think it's so nice for you to be like, especially pointing out authenticity is key. Yeah. But especially I'm so glad to hear that you're finding that you just putting yourself as authentically as possible is reaching, connecting. And I think exactly with future of disability storytelling, it's ultimately that the more we allow us to be specific and kind of, deep diving into what makes us part of the disabled community or, any form of marginalization is like, that's the cherry on top. Like that is the stuff that connects strongly and creates flow between you and your audience, but also for you and for your audience.
Yeah.
I'm very curious then, now that you've kind of been engaging quite a bit with like audiences and audiences of a wide like experience and perspective, I'm curious about how you navigate audience expectations versus your own artistic innovation and pushing beyond the conventional disability narratives.
I guess I just kind of stumble through it and I kind of will almost like annoyingly so push what I want to do. And I've had experiences where mentors or artists who are more experienced than me are telling me to, pull back and do it a certain way. But I guess it comes back to like accommodation. My nervous system wants to work in a certain way. And frankly, if I don't work in a certain way, I just won't get out of bed. There is like a certain expectation. People walking into an arts experience that's got the kind of label on it, disability arts or Aboriginal arts, very much expect a certain attitude, a certain aesthetic as well. And I mean, I guess in the ways that I naturally will kind of bring those things up are great, but if it feels unnatural, then I'm just not going to do it, frankly. And at the moment, it's, my art is paying the rent, but I've also just got to be like very much sticking to my guns, sticking to my interests, my curiosity. And, I've had some wonderful experiences. Like I played a show at Sydney Fringe and it was more directed towards adults. And so then I got some wonderful experiences of like neurodivergent women coming up crying after the show. And, you know it's working then, even if it's to a small audience. And so I'm just going to do what I want to do and hope that someone's going to like it. And if not, I'll get a job at a bookshop or something.
I love that. And I think that's more messaging we need to be hearing from artists that are thriving. If I dare self-proclaim that you're thriving. No, you're on fire. But yeah, I think there's just something so beautiful in that like staunch care to yourself and to your community and stories, and as well like resistance. It's just really, really great. And I think if I pull from inspiration from you that it's okay to kind of exactly like stick to your guns, and that disability storytelling is authenticity naturally, but as well I feel like what you really bring to the space is that disability storytelling is curiosity and joy and resistance, and it's not landing in a mold, which sounds cheesy, but your work is fantastic. One more question, it's around intersectionality. We hear that word a lot. It has a lot of meaning to different people, but in the case to do with future storytelling for disability, how do we think narratives can engage with gender, race and queerness? How do you see that for the future? Just projecting.
Empathetic imagination is kind of really the world that I live in. And I find it hard to kind of separate all of these things, especially in 2025, when all of our issues seem to be big giant arrows pointing in the same direction. And I thrive working with animal imagery and, non-human storytelling, but it's all empathetic imagination. It's putting yourselves into bodies that sense the world differently than your own. And there's like the barriers of language. How do we empathetically live in a world with beings, creatures, animals, but also people that don't have access to language? And I think it's a magical thing when you can use your imagination to really get across these barriers and create these bridges. For me, that's a place to connect with everyone, but also to connect with myself very deeply. And then kind of from there, I think we all find that same touchstone.
Bria, I could just hear you talking all the time, like that empathetic imagination, like, oh, it's so juicy. It's just like captures it perfectly, I feel like, the entire hope for disability storytelling. I'd be very curious as well, like what sort of legacy do you hope to kind of leave? I know like we're still working and growing, but I would be so excited to hear, we talk about the future, but what is the legacy we hope to leave?
Oh, that is so beautiful. I've never been asked that before, but I actually secretly have big legacy hopes. And I don't think I've actually told people about it, but I've been journaling about it since I was like 16. I want to create like a art movement that is multi-species, basically. That kind of encapsulates what I've been talking about, that imaginative space between all of us, and that I want to create work that leaves audiences when they walk out of the building, wherever the show is or the exhibition or whatever it is they are looking at the lights and the birds and they're realizing that the world is so much more alive. I've kind of had that experience a couple times, when you get those real tingles when you leave. And I've just been chasing that ever since. And I think that's the portal to empathy for me. And that was really life-changing for me those few times that I've experienced that with art. And so, that's like kind of what my legacy, I hope one day, would be. And, I'm trying to create these conventions, answer these questions. How do we put non-human bodies in a theatre space, represent them? How do we tell stories, especially if like all these rule makers are saying things like don't use anthropomorphism or don't stray too far from science, or I'm trying to answer these questions and kind of fumble through it, but create a type of theatre that people can recognize as way more alive, expansive, multi-species than the shows that we often pay so much money for, and it's just people talking about a divorce or whatever. The world isn't just people in a room talking, it's birds and it's bugs and it's clouds. And so, I'm trying to pass on that kind of framework that I'm kind of living in all the time.
I totally agree. And Bria, I really hope everyone listening takes away your hopes of the legacy of Portal to Empathy. I think you really landed it so well about disability storytelling and just arts and existing in general. Before we wrap up, Bria, I am burning to know, what are you up to now? What's the goss on your artistic endeavours?
Yeah, well, I am continuing to develop a show that I started with Accessible Arts in the Next Level Mentorship. I'm creating a show called Animal Dreams. That's kind of a working title. We'll see if it sticks. But it kind of goes into the question of, what do animals dream about when they're going to sleep? There's a lot of scientific consensus about whether or not animals dream. And to me, it's fairly obvious that they do dream. And so I'm kind of taking it to the next step. Like, what are they dreaming of? What do those dreams look like? And trying my best to extend it into bodies that, what would an animal that sees color differently than us dream of? What would underwater animals dream of? And I've been reading a lot about it. It's so interesting, like the ways birds, when they're asleep at night, are practicing their songs in their head as they're babies when they're learning bird songs. I was also reading this morning about how animals experience nightmares and PTSD, and like lab rats are like just going through it, basically. I won't go into detail, but I was doing some pretty harrowing reading on that this morning. I'm trying to find like a more extended puppetry language. So I am pretty confident with shadow puppetry. I want to make paper mache, clay, heads and figures and ghost-like puppets, and oh my gosh, it's so hard. At the moment, there's a bit of a gap between, I think, my aesthetic tastes, my ambitions, and my actual sculpting skill sets. So I'm like trying to sculpt these animal heads, and I'm asking like, well, it doesn't have to be a perfect one-to-one representation, but more, what would this animal look like in a dream? You know, like the funny ways we can dream and misremember things and see an old friend, but they've got a different face. Or when I dream of my little brother, he's 19 now, but he's always 2 years old in my dreams. And yeah, I'm kind of interested in those topsy-turvy worlds. Like I have a story that I'm working on about a dog. You follow the dog into their dream and the dog takes themselves on a walk, and it's like through this very strange, twisted world, and they're encountering other dogs, but they're kind of misremembering what other dogs look like. So it's like a 3-headed dachshund that's like trying to kill them. And so, yeah, this show I'm hoping will be like super imaginative and broad in that kind of animal-scape, dreamscape way. Yeah, it's a really exciting project, and, you know, it's a dream space. I'm kind of dreaming everything at the moment, focusing a lot on sleep. And yeah, it's been really fun. I'm really excited, but there's so much more to do.
I think it's so wonderful that you're able to share the process, because I feel like so many artists just think that this all happens in like one night and it's done.
I wish.
Yeah,
I wish it did.
But I also love that you're prioritizing sleep. Like that's such rest is resistance, y'all. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You're doing so much in what you say just breathes like Crip culture. And I'm so excited to see your future projects.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bedelia. This has been wonderful.
That's a wrap on this episode of Access Ideas and Insights. This podcast is proudly produced by Accessible Arts and Kiera Brew Kurec, with sound design by Tralala Blip. Access consulting was provided by Macro Impact Consulting and our advisory group. We also thank our Auslan interpreters. This podcast series is proudly supported by the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales, the principal funding partner of Accessible Arts.